She showed up just as Ethan Morgan was pushing back his chair to leave, and the first thing she said was, "We've met before." Not a flirty icebreaker, not a line meant to impress, just calm. So calm it made him freeze in place. Ethan had already decided this date was over. 30 minutes. That was the limit he'd set for himself from the start. And his watch told him 28 had already passed. This woman was nearly 20 minutes late. In his world, that was basically a no-show. The tiny Italian restaurant was tucked deep into a quiet street in Portland. Soft yellow lights, old weathered brick walls, the faint smell of toasted bread and thyme in the air. All of it felt far too ordinary for a man used to having lunch in glass conference rooms in San Francisco, where every conversation was measured in ROI. Ethan didn't pick this place. His sister, the one who had recently taken it upon herself to be his emotional manager post-divorce, had sent him a short text. "Go. I promise you'll open your heart, not your wallet." And because he'd already made the mistake of telling his nephew out loud that he'd try dating again, he nodded. But in his mind, the internal timer had started, just like it would before a meeting with investors. 30 minutes. Anything beyond that, he was out. Ethan Morgan, 38, tech millionaire, founder of a multi-million-dollar AI platform, was not the type of man who let anyone mess with his schedule. He avoided randomness like the plague. The unpredictable irritated him. So sitting there waiting almost half an hour had already pushed him to his limit. And then, she walked in. No cocktail dress, no cloud of luxury perfume, no designer heels clacking with carefully calculated attention-seeking rhythm. Faded jeans, white sneakers, not the designer kind. Red curls, tousled just enough to be real, not the staged messy but pretty look. She didn't even pretend to be flustered about being late. No frantic apologies, no rushed excuses. Just walked up to his table with a gaze so calm it threw him off balance. Ethan was ready to deliver the polite exit line he'd used more times than he could count. "Sorry, I have to go. Maybe we can." But he didn't even get halfway through the first word before she smiled and said, "We've met before." Ethan's expression didn't change, but inside, every alert system in his brain lit up. He'd heard similar lines plenty of times, usually from investors, advice seekers, Forbes, or TED Talk fans. But this tone, this wasn't like any of those. It wasn't "I know who you are." It wasn't "you inspired me." It wasn't "you saved my startup with a tweet." It was deeply personal. He sat back down, not because he'd changed his mind, but because he was curious. "Is that so?" He replied with just 3 words, purely out of politeness. She sat down across from him, like this was a conversation that had been scheduled long ago. No glancing around, no sizing him up, not even a look at the $20,000 watch on his wrist, something most people couldn't help but do. "You don't remember me," she said gently, pouring herself a glass of water from the carafe on the table. No hesitation, no waiting for him. With that one sentence, Ethan knew one thing for sure. She didn't want anything from him. She wasn't auditioning for his attention. Her calmness unsettled him a little, and also drew him in. "I'm Ethan," he said, sticking to the standard social script. "I know," she replied instantly, without missing a beat. A silence followed, tense, but not awkward. And for the first time in years, Ethan decided not to check his watch. Outside the window, Portland was draped in the kind of misty drizzle the city was known for. Not heavy enough to open an umbrella, but just enough to remind you that everything could fade from memory if you didn't hold on to it. In that moment, Ethan couldn't explain why he was still sitting there. He just knew the 30-minute mark had come and gone, and he hadn't gotten up. Because the woman sitting across from him wasn't the type he usually dated, and it seemed she wasn't the kind who walked into someone's life just to walk back out. Ethan still didn't know why he hadn't left. He should have. On time, on schedule, like he always did. But the woman in front of him didn't fit any pattern he'd ever known. No small talk, no attempts to impress, not a single mention of his work, his money, or his name, even though it was clear she knew exactly who he was. Everything about her was a contradiction. Simple, yet never out of place. Calm, but not detached. She carried herself with the kind of clarity that said she hadn't shown up to be chosen. "So, we've met before?" Ethan asked, voice low, trying not to let the curiosity show too much. She gave a slight nod. "Seabrook, the summer you were 16. Ethan looked up. His hand froze on the rim of his glass. Not because of the name of the town, but because of the feeling it brought with it. Like someone had suddenly opened a door to a room he'd locked away a long time ago. "Seabrook," he repeated, unsure if he was trying to confirm it or just trying to remember. "I've lived in Seabrook ever since," she said, her voice light, like she was talking about an old friend who never left. "I work at the town's community center. Nothing big, just giving kids a place to play and a few grown-ups a place to start over." The woman, Aubrey, as he now knew from the match confirmation on the dating app, leaned in just slightly. Her tone was steady. No blame, no pressure. "You stayed there for a few months. At your aunt's house, I think. You used to sit alone on the porch a lot. I'd sit on the other side of the fence, drawing. Neither of us talked much." Ethan swallowed hard. It had been over 20 years, and the memory of Seabrook was almost like a faded photo in his mind, its colors bleached out by time and intentional forgetting. "That summer wasn't a good time for me," he said quietly. "Not quite a confession, not quite an excuse." "I know," she replied softly. "It wasn't for me either." Ethan looked at her more closely. In the light, her hair had hints of brown, curls shaped like the sea breeze had molded them since childhood. Nothing about her screamed for attention, but something about her felt familiar. "You were the girl who sat by the hawthorn tree?" he asked, surprised at himself for remembering the name of the tree in the yard. For the first time, Aubrey laughed. Not loud, not sharp, just a soft sound, enough to break a thin wall between them. "Yeah, that hawthorn tree covered half of the broken bench I used to sit on," she said. "You once tossed me an apple and said, 'Eat, it's less stupid than starving.' Then you turned around and walked off." Ethan frowned, not because he didn't believe her, but because he remembered. Not the details, but enough. Enough to know that the boy in that story was him. Closed off, angry, so terrified of pity that the only way he knew how to be kind was coldly. Aubrey went on slowly. "You didn't know, but I hadn't eaten in 2 days. My mom left with her new boyfriend. Didn't leave me anything but an empty fridge." Ethan sat up straighter. No room left for defensiveness. "And I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," she said before he could speak. "I survived. I got through it. I grew up, not because of you, but because I chose to. But I came here today, not to blame you, not to ask for anything." She paused for a moment. "But to say thank you, because sometimes a small, unintentional act is enough to change the way a kid sees the world." Ethan had never had anyone make him feel this silent. Not because he lacked words, he always had words, but because he'd never had to sit with old feelings before. He'd turned everything into data. Dad went bankrupt, Mom got sick, they left town. He learned how to sort trauma like junk files, delete and don't recover. And now, a living, breathing person had stepped out of that forgotten folder, sat across from him, and brought it all back like dust on a desk he thought was clean. "Why now?" he finally asked. Aubrey didn't answer right away. She looked him in the eye, not asking, not accusing, just seeing. "Because I saw your name in a news piece a few months ago," she said, "about the tech investment project for dying towns. And when I saw you were the one behind it, I couldn't believe it. And I wanted to know," she added, her voice lower now, "if the boy who quietly shared an apple back then was still in there somewhere." Ethan leaned back in his chair. His fingers tightened slightly around the cold glass of water without thinking. No one had ever asked him that. No one had ever looked at him like that. Like the money didn't matter. Like the only thing that mattered was who he still was. A breeze slipped through the crack in the restaurant door. They were over 100 miles from Seabrook, but somehow Ethan could smell the old salt air. He didn't know what he'd do after standing up from this table. But one thing was certain. This date, one he'd expected to be meaningless, had just opened a door to a part of his life he'd long abandoned. And the woman named Aubrey Quinn, quiet, steady, without drama, had been the one to unlock it. No permission, no knocking. She had simply walked in. Ethan left the restaurant close to 10 p.m., but it was nearly dawn before he could fall asleep. The hotel windows were thick and soundproof, but his mind wasn't. Everything Aubrey had said played on a loop, out of order, like slow, crashing waves against the walls inside his head. That feeling, being called out from a part of himself he'd long kept locked away, was anything but comfortable. She hadn't asked for anything. No blame, no strings tied to the past, but it was exactly that calmness that left him so unsettled. Everything he'd built, including the way he buried a chaotic childhood, suddenly felt like it had no firewall. With just a few words from a stranger, the armor he'd spent nearly 2 decades building started to shift. The next morning, instead of catching his early flight back to San Francisco like planned, Ethan rented an SUV. He told the front desk he wanted to drive along the coast to clear his head. Even he wasn't sure why he was heading toward Seabrook. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe the restless, broken sleep had pushed him to find a reason to understand himself better. Or maybe he just needed to know if what Aubrey said was real, if she truly remembered him, or if it was just a memory imagined by a lonely kid who needed someone to believe in. Seabrook still looked almost exactly the way Ethan remembered, or at least the way childhood had made it feel. Narrow streets lined with trees brushing the curb, the ocean not far off. The breeze carried that same mix of salt and damp wood. Life here moved slow. No sports cars. No franchise coffee shops. No one rushing anywhere. The community center sat at the corner of the main road, looking like an old preschool that had been gently repurposed. Out front, a wooden sign, hand-painted, read, "Today is free drawing day. Everyone welcome." Ethan cut the engine. He sat still in the driver's seat for a while, fingers resting on the ignition key. Part of him said, "Don't go in there." But his feet opened the door before his head could talk them out of it. Aubrey was sitting cross-legged in the middle of a circle of kids, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, a streak of blue watercolor in her hair. In front of her, a little boy was struggling to draw a superhero riding a shark. Beside them, two young moms chatted in that quiet shorthand only people who've stayed up all night with crying babies can understand. Ethan watched from a distance. She didn't see him right away, but in that brief moment, he saw someone completely different from the woman at the restaurant the night before. Focused, full, at peace, and strangely, he found himself jealous. Of the kids. Of the way she gave them her attention, her calm, her presence. When she finally looked up and caught his eyes, she simply raised an eyebrow. No surprise, no questions, no judgment. "Here on vacation?" she asked as she walked over, wiping her hands on the dish towel tucked into her waistband. Ethan nodded, half smiling. "Call it a change of scenery. And Seabrook's air just thin enough for you to breathe?" Her voice carried a gentle tease, light sarcasm, without the sting. "Not bad," he replied. "Saw the sign welcoming everyone, figured I'd drop in." In the days that followed, Ethan didn't leave town. He didn't stay too close, but he didn't go too far either. Every few days he'd show up at the center, sometimes with an excuse about sponsoring art supplies, other times pretending he was doing local market research. Aubrey saw through all of it, but she never called him out. One afternoon, they sat on a wooden bench behind the center, facing the sea. The kids had all gone home. The sunset cast a warm glow that lit her hair gold, like wet sand catching light. Ethan talked. Not in long stories, not in neat order, but for the first time, he let it out. At 15, his dad was sued for financial fraud. The family imploded. His mom sent him to Seabrook for a few months, then came back for him. That was the last summer he saw her smile. A few months later, she died of a stroke. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It just felt hollow. Aubrey listened without interrupting. When he finally stopped, she said only one thing. "I get it. That feeling when everything familiar disappears and you're not grown enough yet to know what you're supposed to be afraid of." Then she told her part. No walls, no filters. Her mother was addicted to pills. Her father left when she was 6. Her grandmother raised her for a few years, then passed away. After that, she drifted through foster homes, never staying anywhere long. The sandwich Ethan left that day, just leftover food from his perspective, was, to her, the first meal she'd had after 2 days of hunger. And it was the moment she realized that good people still existed in the world, even if they didn't know they were being good. Ethan sat in silence for a long time. Then, slowly, he said, "So, you didn't come to see me because you needed help, but—" Aubrey nodded. "But because I wanted to see if you still wanted to live like a person, not just a brand." He let out a soft laugh. No defense, no pushback. Just, for the first time in a very long time, Ethan felt like he didn't have to play a role. The last time Ethan came to Seabrook, he hadn't planned to stop by Aubrey's house. That day, he was just dropping off a box of rare sketchbooks from Portland, a gift for the community center. But when he pulled up and saw her porch light still on, despite the late hour, he hesitated. Then stepped out of the car. Aubrey opened the door wearing a thin sweatshirt, her hair in a loose bun, fingers still stained with ink. "Bringing more sketchbooks?" she asked, half teasing. Ethan smiled. "And some chocolate pastries from that new place on Main. Heard they're impossible to get." Aubrey stepped aside, holding the door open wider. "Well then, I can't say no." She led him into a small living room, neat but warm. Children's drawings covered the fridge, coloring books were stacked on the table. A few dinosaur-shaped pillows draped casually across the sofa. Ethan was just about to sit when a small voice called from down the hallway. "Mom, I can't find the robot arm." He turned toward the sound. A little girl with soft brown curls, wearing star-print pajamas, was digging through a toy bin. When she looked up, her eyes met Ethan's. There was no shyness in her expression, no hesitation. Instead, she put her hands on her hips, tilted her head, and asked bluntly, "Your mom's new friend, aren't you?" Aubrey laughed. "Mia, use your indoor voice, please." Ethan stepped closer and crouched down to her level. "I'm Ethan." "Mia," she shook his hand like a grown-up. "My robot's missing its left arm." "Can it still work with one arm?" Ethan asked, tilting his head. "If I reprogram it, maybe, but it's not fair." Ethan raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by how grown-up she sounded. "Why not?" "Because I think everyone deserves to have all their parts to live, and if they don't, then someone should help them make up for it." Ethan froze for a second, not because she was wrong, but because a kid her age shouldn't get things like that so deeply. He glanced over at Aubrey. She was watching her daughter, gentle, proud. Mia went back to taping her robot's arm together and muttered, "Mom says I'm a product of survival, not obligation. So I have to learn how to fix myself if something breaks." Ethan didn't say anything. That sentence echoed in his head the rest of the night, even as he drove back to the hotel. A product of survival, not obligation. It sounded powerful and full of cracks. A few weeks later, on a morning soaked with heavy rain, Ethan's phone rang just as he was about to leave town. An unknown number, but the voice on the other end he recognized instantly. The center's coordinator. "Mia has a high fever, mild seizure. Aubrey's car won't start. They're panicking. I didn't know who else to call." Ethan didn't hesitate. He spun the car around and sped through nearly 10 miles of slick, rain-slicked roads straight to the center. Aubrey was outside, holding Mia in her arms, hands trembling, face pale. Ethan flung the car door open. She didn't say a word. She just handed her daughter to him. On the way to the hospital, Mia drifted in and out of sleep. Ethan could hear Aubrey whispering beside him, "Please no, please don't be something bad." At the ER, while the nurse asked intake questions, Ethan handed over his own insurance card. Aubrey was holding Mia tight, unable to respond, so he stepped in. The clerk typed, then asked again, "And the child's full name, Mia?" "Quinn," Ethan answered, using her mother's last name. But the nurse frowned. "No, her records say her name is Mia Morgan." Ethan froze. He said nothing. Just quietly stepped back as the doctors rushed Mia into the emergency room. Morgan, his last name. His mind spun with questions. Had Aubrey hidden this from him? Was Mia their child? If not, why carry his name? And if so, why never tell him? That night, after Mia was out of danger and moved to a recovery room, Ethan and Aubrey sat together in the hallway. The rain hadn't stopped. The corridor was quiet, lit by the kind of dim yellow light that felt both safe and far too intimate. "You saw her last name, didn't you?" Aubrey asked. Ethan nodded. "It's not because of you," she said immediately. "Mia's not your daughter." The answer was clear, but it didn't untangle his confusion. Aubrey exhaled slowly. "I gave her the last name Morgan, because it was the first name that ever represented something kind in my life. That's all it was." Ethan said nothing. After a moment, Aubrey continued, her voice steady. "I got pregnant while staying at a shelter for women who'd been abused. There was a man there. He made me believe I had to repay the kindness of being allowed to stay. I was scared. I didn't know I had the right to say no. When I found out I was pregnant, I was going to end it. But the first time I saw her heartbeat on the ultrasound screen, I changed my mind. I didn't want a terrible person to define my life. I chose to keep her, to raise her differently, with kindness." Ethan turned to look at her, not with pity, but with quiet respect. "You saved yourself," he said softly. "No," Aubrey replied, her eyes fixed on the door to Mia's room. "I saved her, and she saved me right back." Ethan didn't say anything more, but something in him had shifted. Since the day they reconnected, he'd thought Aubrey was someone who owed him, a good memory he'd accidentally left behind. But now, he saw it clearly. The person who had been changed, fundamentally, deeply, permanently, was him. Aubrey Quinn wasn't a wound waiting to be healed. She was living proof that some people walk out of hell with bare feet and a heart that's still warm. And that, more than anything, made Ethan realize he was no longer tall enough to look down on anyone. He didn't return to San Francisco right after Mia got better. He claimed he was researching a region for a nonprofit initiative. But the truth was simpler. He didn't want to leave. Not because of the town, not because of lingering curiosity about Aubrey, but because, for the first time, staying just felt right. No spreadsheet confirmed it, no ROI to calculate. Just a feeling. This was where he was supposed to be. A few days later, Ethan quietly reached out to a small nonprofit operating in Oregon, not under his company name, not through Morgan Digital. He wanted to fund the Seabrook Community Center through an independent trust. No publicity, no press, no branding. He just wanted to help. For no other reason than because he could. But Aubrey knew. She figured it out when someone from the nonprofit emailed a confirmation about the incoming transfer. That day, she asked him to stop by the center during the lunch break. The air was cold, the sky coated in dull gray, and the only sound in her office was the soft ticking of the space heater. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, just clear, calm, firm. Ethan stood still for a moment. "I just wanted to." "No," she cut in. "I'm not asking why you did it. I'm asking, did you ever think to ask if I needed it?" He couldn't answer right away. "I've raised Mia on my own, kept this center alive for 6 years on a torn-up budget," Aubrey said, steady and unflinching. "I know how to be grateful, but I don't need to be rescued like some well-meaning investment project." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I don't see you as something that needs developing." "You don't have to see me that way," she said, eyes locked on his. "Your actions already speak loud enough. You're using the same tool you've used your whole life to solve problems. But I'm not a problem. And I don't need a man who makes me feel like I owe him something." Just a week later, things got more complicated. The state government announced budget cuts to community centers that didn't meet their educational effectiveness metrics. Seabrook Center was on the short list, slated for early shutdown. The news spread fast, as bad news always does. But worse than the funding cuts were the rumors. A post, source unknown, surfaced on a local forum. It implied that the center was being secretly backed by a tech investor with plans to acquire the property for a beachfront resort project. No name was mentioned, but everyone knew who it pointed to: Ethan. A few parents pulled their kids from the program. Some started looking at Aubrey differently. The doubt crept in like fog. No one said it aloud, but the distance was there. Aubrey didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up. Ethan came to the center, only to be told she was taking a few days off. He stood alone in the courtyard, the same spot where just weeks ago Mia had raced around with her taped-up robot. Now only a few plastic chairs leaned sideways in the rain. And he knew he was at a crossroads. He could either step back, let the distance grow, protect himself, or step forward, go public, fight the doubt, prove that what he felt for both Aubrey and Mia wasn't a strategy or a savior complex. It was real. Or he could step back, give her the space she needed to prove she wasn't being emotionally funded by anyone. For the first time in his life, Ethan Morgan chose not to intervene. He withdrew. Not out of weakness, but out of respect. He stepped away to prove one thing: real love doesn't need to be purchased. And the woman he truly cared about deserved to stand on her own, unshadowed by anyone, even the man willing to love her. Before leaving, he sent one letter. No justification. No explanation. Just a single sentence written in careful, deliberate handwriting. "I'm withdrawing my offer, not because I don't want to help, but because I believe you're strong enough to choose how you want to stand." Then he left Seabrook. No goodbyes, no loose ends. Because sometimes walking away at the right time isn't giving up. It's another way of loving someone, with silence and respect. Bookmark. Nearly 2 months had passed since Ethan left Seabrook. No texts, no emails, not a single trace he was still anywhere close. Aubrey didn't reach out. She was too busy holding the center together through its final stretch. Every source of funding had dried up. The town budget was gone. And every little chair, every painting on the wall now carried the quiet weight of an impending goodbye. That day, Seabrook woke to a rare sunlit sky. The center hosted its final event, a children's art exhibition, the last celebration before the doors would close for good. Kids wore bright clothes, the courtyard packed with parents. Paintings were strung from ceiling beams to window frames, a riot of color, messy in places, but full of life, like the hearts that made them. Backstage, Aubrey checked the microphone, straightened name tags, kept her hands busy. Mia stood next to her, adjusting her dress, holding a folded piece of paper. "You remember everything?" Aubrey asked. Mia nodded. "I'm not reading the whole thing, just one part." "Which part?" Mia smiled, eyes playful, like she was keeping a secret. "The part you don't have to worry about." Ethan stood in the crowd, cap pulled low, dark jacket blending him into the edges. No one recognized him. He hadn't planned on coming. He'd already said goodbye, in ink, on paper, the day he left. But that morning, waking up in Portland, something in him felt unfinished. Like he still hadn't faced the one thing he'd spent his whole life avoiding: attachment. Music played. The stage was makeshift, pieced together with planks and paint. Kids took turns stepping up, calling out the names of their drawings, giggling, tripping over their own excitement. Then it was Mia's turn. She climbed up, adjusted the microphone, stood tall. "My name is Mia," she said, clear and steady. "I don't have a dad, but I know I'm not missing anything." The courtyard went still. Because someone helped me believe this. Men don't have to be perfect. They just have to stay. No one spoke. A few quiet breaths caught in the air. Ethan stood there, his hand clenched around the sponsorship contract tucked deep in his coat pocket. His eyes were glassy. Not from sadness, but because for the first time, he felt seen. Not through a Forbes profile, not through polished headlines, but through the honest eyes of a child. When the program ended, Aubrey stepped out from behind the curtain, still juggling the list of kids' names, her hair slightly undone from the rush. Ethan walked up to her. He didn't say a word, just reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. On the front, the logo of a newly formed nonprofit. No mention of his name, no trace of Morgan Digital, not a single line suggesting a businessman had anything to do with it. He handed it to her. "What is this?" she asked, brow furrowing slightly. "Long-term funding commitment for the center," Ethan said quietly. "Enough to keep it running for at least 5 more years. You run it your way, no one above you, no conditions." Aubrey looked at him for a long moment. She didn't speak, just gave a small nod, no defensiveness in her eyes, no walls. Just a simple gesture, enough to say I understand. Right then, Mia came running up, still holding her small robot with one wheel missing. "Uncle Ethan," she said, breathless. "Can you teach me how to build a real robot?" Ethan crouched down to meet her eyes. "If your mom says it's okay," he turned to Aubrey. She didn't say a word, just nodded again. One more time, and that was enough. In the hallway of the community center, the late afternoon sun slanted through children's paintings, casting imperfect, vibrant colors across the walls. Messy, honest, real. Ethan stood there, not as a sponsor, not as a CEO writing checks, not as anyone's savior. He stood there simply as a man who chose to stay, not out of duty, not to prove anything, but because for the first time in his life he wanted to stay with himself, to stay with the people who showed him that love isn't ownership, it's presence. And just like that, he was no longer the man who entered lives only to disappear. He had chosen to stay.